Yeah, so welcome back. Welcome back to our 9th Lviv Media Forum. It is the second day, and I understand that everyone is tired because we have had very intense discussions, very intense panel discussions, presentations, debates, and also you could discuss the story when you were networking amid coffee and great food. Thank you once again, the organizers of Lviv Media Forum, for this marvelous event, and thank you to the donors and partners for making this event possible. But now it is time to start with the presentations. I have some announcements before we start with the presentations. First one is a sad one. Unfortunately, there will be no presentation, Demons of the War, How Propaganda in Media Foreshadowed Aggression by Nastya Stanko. She could not arrive to the forum, unfortunately. But we will have all other presentations, we will have them. And this means that we will have a bit more time for your questions and the discussion. And here I urge you, don't hold your questions, raise your questions, ask them, debate, express your impressions, and participate in the discussion. I have also another announcement. Those who want to register for the Unbroken tour, it is possible to register not only in the WhatsApp chat as it was before, but also on the ground floor. If you come to the registration table, you may register for Unbroken there. So after this panel, you may just, if you want, you may appear at the registration panel and you will be registered there. So now we will have our presentations, and the format will be the following. We will have one by one the presentations which will be announced, and the authors will explain a bit about what it is about and maybe have some words saying about them. And after all the presentations will be done, we will have good half an hour to raise questions. So if you follow us on Facebook translation or in other social networks, you may ask your questions there or leave your comments. And if not, if you're also lucky and you're here in offline, then you may do it after the presentations will be done. So now I welcome Ron Haviv as a first speaker. And Ron is a co-founder of Seventh Foundation, and you have arrived from New York, right? Yes. So one last announcement before we start. Many presentations, and including one by Ron, has graphics. So it has pictures, images which can trigger you if you're sensitive or you don't want to see them like graphic content. In this case, you are warned that the content is there, so your decision if you stay or not. And it will be the case for the most presentations. So Ron, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to Lviv Media Forum for the invitation, a chance to share some of my thoughts and work with you. I'm a photographer. I've been a photographer for more than 30 years, primarily dedicating my time to raising awareness about human rights, primarily in conflict and post-conflict situations. And unfortunately, what I've documented in Ukraine over the last year and a half is not something new, but something that continuously needs to be told to the world over, in that ever-present hope of trying to have some impact to try to stop the next war from happening. Over the last few years, each year, there's been over 1 trillion photographs that have been taken. All of us today are photographers. We photograph things that are important to us. We photograph our family. We photograph our cats. We photograph our lunches. And we try to explain our lives to some degree to ourselves and the world around us through images. But one of the challenges that exists for people like myself, especially when documenting a story like Ukraine, is how do you get your work to rise above the noise? How do you get the work to have impact? How do you get the work to mean something? So it's a challenge that exists for the photographers from around the world that have been documenting Ukraine, and of course, even more importantly, for the Ukrainian photographers that are trying to tell the story of their homeland. What do you do? What can you do? And what is the purpose of this type of photography? Because the photography, when you're covering a conflict, the photography can have several different roles. The first one is the most immediate, to be able to show people what's happening. This is what's going on now. What are you going to do about it? Raise awareness, have politicians react, have civilians react, be part of the dialogue. A photograph itself cannot stop a war, but it can be part of a chain of reactions that can have impact. Eventually, as time goes by, the photographs start to have other lives. The photographs become symbols. The photographs become part of education. We've already spoken several times yesterday and today about this idea about the battle that exists on the ground, and then the second battle, which is that of memory, of which photography plays an incredible part. The photographs go out into the world and they live lives of their own, and they have this ability to affect people in many different ways. And that is one of the signs of the power of photography. When you have imagery that people will resonate with, that people will react with the war in Ukraine, you have an incredible amount of photography, of great photography. It's probably going to be the most photographed war in the history of war and photography. But even then, with all this work, you have photographs such as the photograph from the Ukrainian photographer Evgeny Malotaka from the Associated Press from Mariupol, of the woman in the stretcher, which won 2 Pulitzer Prizes this year, almost unheard of in the world of photography. That photograph has become a symbol of Ukraine. It's the idea of that kind of image being able to rise above everything else and resonate and have impact. But one of the things that's incredibly important is that as time goes on, as we're starting to see, and we've talked about it throughout the day, of what happens when people get tired. Oh, another picture from Ukraine. Oh, the war in Ukraine is still going on. And you start to lose that attention. And then at the same time, it becomes more and more difficult on the ground for photographers to gain access to tell the stories of the Ukrainian people. We are entering that kind of issue where it's becoming more and more difficult for us to work, and it's becoming more and more difficult for us to gain the audience's interest. But it's incredibly important because once we lose that, once we start to accept Ukraine as just happening another day, it will be very difficult, I think, in some extents, to have real impact with our work. It will remain powerful in the future, but the goal always is the immediacy of the work. And so you really want this ability for our work that we're providing, myself and Chris and others, to have this truth to it, for it to be basically undeniable, as we saw with the work from Evgeny in Mariupol when the Russians said, oh, that's not possible, that didn't happen. And there was the work to prove that it did. So I think that all of us together, to make sure that when you're being affected by the work, when you're sharing the work, that it's work that is true, that it's work that does justice to the story, and that the ability for us as photographers on the ground to continue to be able to tell the story will be imperative for the success of people understanding what is actually happening on the ground today. So I'm going to leave you with a short film of some of my work from last year. There's a bit of a pun with the title. Of course, it's not just the beginning of the war, it's another part of the war, but so many people obviously never heard of Ukraine until the invasion, and hopefully my work and others will have the impact that we all want. So thank you.
Tonight at 10, we're live in Ukraine, a country at war after a huge Russian military offensive by land, sea and air. The onslaught began just before dawn with a barrage of missiles on multiple targets right across the country. Then, with Russian attack helicopters and fighter jets homing in on the Ukrainian army, Vladimir Putin gave this warning for anyone trying to stand in his way.
Whoever tries to interfere with us or threaten our country should know that Russia's response will be immediate and lead to such consequences that have never been experienced in history.
I never expect it can destroy the Russian soldier in present time. Its present time can destroy the thousands of apartments building, destroy the city. Mariupol doesn't exist anymore.
Today we travel from Chernihiv. We start from 1 o'clock and we move from our town 15 o'clock. And just now we reach here. It's okay. Your driver perfect, believe me. We don't have light, we don't have internet, we don't have charge for mobile, you know. We cannot talk with anybody just 2-3 days already we don't have any charge. We don't have gas.
Наша славна Україна зажурилася, а ми тую червону калину підіймемо, а ми нашу славну Україну гей, розвеселимо. Гей, у полі ярої пшениці золотистий лан розпочали стрільці українські з ворогами тан, а ми тую ярою пшеницю і зберемо.
To save, they lay inside the ground because they don't know where to run away.
I don't know how to call these people. They are not human beings who began this war. They are not human beings and not men. They are, so to say, crazy creatures.
Putin started a war against Ukraine, against the whole democratic world. He wants to destroy my country. He wants to destroy our country, everything we have built, everything we live for.
Do you feel the difference to fighting for money and to defend the future of your children? And that's why the Ukrainian soldier, Ukrainian army have huge spirit and goodwill to defend our hometown, to defend our country, and that's why this war is not our war. It's defensive war for us, but this war we kick out the Russian soldier from our country.
Oh yeah, you see? That means PDR, парашютно-десантная рота.
That almost all division is dead, like 700 or 600 of them are dead.
So now we have so much work, and I don't think it was discovered yet because now they're just collecting bodies and trying to bury them. And I don't know exactly amount, but these volunteers, what we met today, they told us that since war started, they collected at least 340 bodies, something like that.
Слава Україні! Героям слава! Слава Україні! Героям слава! Слава Україні! Героям слава!
I think that everyone who has watched this film has this feeling of how close it was to really terrible things, and really terrible things have happened. And we all remember how it began and how we heard the first explosions or read in Messenger about the first explosions and about the destiny of those who are our friends, colleagues, or just neighbors. I think it is a time to stand in the memory of those who have not survived until this day. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ron, for this remembrance, because it is so close, and your video didn't let us to forget how it started and how it goes on. Thank you. The next presentation will be done by Antonina Ria, who is from Ukrainian PR Army. Antonina, welcome.
Добрий вечір, everybody.
Good evening, everybody.
I also am very impressed by this video, and I will try to gather again my thoughts. And first of all, I really appreciate to take part in this discussion, and thank you, Lviv Media Forum, for the invitation. And it's a big honor for me to take part with these great participants, with these powerful participants. And I also experienced the full-scale invasion personally, but the reaction of my body on stress is the mobilization. So that was the way how PR Army started, because within the first hours of the full-scale invasion, the professionals from PR, journalism, content making, and every specialization close to this, they gather it together, they were united to oppose Russia invasion on the information field, because, you know, with the missiles, with rockets, they also attacked us in the information front. They started to share the fake news, what is going on in Ukraine, and I felt that my mission is to protect this space, and that's how we united, and we started to oppose Russia and to make Ukrainian voices vocal and more noticeable in media. And since then we do this like the independent organization. It's NGO now called, we call it PR Army. It's non-governmental, non-commercial, and first of all it was volunteers, and now we are like more structured like NGO. And our mission is still to share the truth from Ukraine and to fight lie about Russo-Ukrainian war. And we also don't give the world a chance to forget about this war. And could you please give me... And I will tell a little bit more of what we do, how we cooperate with media to do this. And first of all, I will present the streams we are working with. We offer eyewitnesses and experts from Ukraine to the international media. It's a simple way to get any contacts or stories to contact us, and we will help not only with the contacts, but with the context of Ukraine. It's very important. Yeah? Now we are working with such topics like you see on the presentation. It's sanctions, technical ban, nuclear threat, culture, eco-crisis, security, food crisis, disinformation, and deportation also is a big part, and I will return back a little bit later about it. For the first year, we achieved such results as we facilitated over 5,000 publications in around 80 countries all over the world, and more than 7 billion reach. And also we achieved Best in Crisis PR Week award and some other honorable awards. I will not make you tired to make a list of them, but they prove for us and make us more confident that we are doing right things for Ukraine and for the world. And the publications we facilitated appeared in different outlets as well, in local and niche outlets, as well in tier 1 media, and lots of media I saw in our program. The representatives are present here, and some of them I even recognized we cooperated earlier, and it's a very cool experience to reach people here. You know that now I will tell a little bit more about the platform we launched this year. Russia, as you know, has been able to influence international media and various audience for decades using propaganda and discreditizing Ukraine. And Ukrainian voices at the same time were neglected. And, you know, sometimes to comment what is going on in Ukraine, I used some Russian speakers like from Russia, and we decided to fix it, and we see that still well-known media use quotes from Russian sources just because they do not see any alternatives. Yeah. And therefore we created a platform which is named Voices of Freedom, and this is the screenshot from the website, and the name of the website you will see on the top of the slide. And when you open this site, you will see the bottom for media, and there you will find the examples of experts we can offer, but also you can apply for any speaker you are looking for. You just mention what's the topic you are covering, and we will help to find the right person from Ukraine who can help you with the comments. And we already have around 200 different experts. And by the way, thank you very much, Sergei, who also present and cooperate with us and help us to communicate with the journalists. Yeah, you can find yourself here. Yeah, and we appreciate so much our cooperation. And I promised I promised to come back to the deportation topic, forcible deportations. And this is a big stream in our organization, and we call this campaign Where Our People? And it has the separate website, deportation.org.ua, where you can find the stories of people who have been deported, and also we discover the historical angle, what was in the past. We discover different materials about, it was mentioned already about Crimean Tatars, and also in Baltic, in Poland, because we know that these facts were present in the past. And actually a few panels ago I asked the question of the panelists, how could we motivate journalists from different countries to raise this question about forcible deportation. And we advocate changes here, and we offered eyewitnesses and stories for International Criminal Court, and now you know there is some movement in this process, but still there are no mechanic how to come back people home. And this is the big goal in this campaign, not just punish perpetrators, but also to find the solution how to return people back. And as NGO, we also stimulate governmental communication to talk about this. And we started to do this campaign in April 2022. And at that time, the information space had a lack of information about this. Fortunately, now it is a topic on the table. Yeah, we can hear it, but still some aspects, some angles are not covered, and we help with this. So you can just find me or the contacts of the organization, and we will help you with experts and with stories as well. And I will finish my speech with this slide to show you some case how it works. Yeah, we all know that the Olympic Games will be in Paris in 2024, and still we know the decisions of organizers that they are ready to accept Russians in this competition, and we launched the campaign to oppose the participation of Russian athletes because mostly are related to the country and military itself, and of course many of them support war, and we are not ready to keep silence and accept this, so we started to fight with this on the information front, and we asked Lesya Tsurenko for the interview and found great journalists from the Associated France Press who recorded this interview, and I really agree with the title that we need to beat Russians on any field, and I'm really very thankful for journalists who still cover Ukraine and still share the stories, what is going on. Don't give the world to forget about this, and find different angles how to move these messages to your audience. And I want to ask, let's beat Russians on the information front together. Yeah, you can find. Thank you. Yeah, you can find us on the social network, so please join, follow, and I will be happy to see everyone in our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antonina, for your moving presentation and for your work, like what you're doing, like on the info space, and beating the Russians is indeed what is like. I think nobody in this room would deny that it is one of the best things we can do to achieve stable peace and prosperity, not only in Ukraine but also in Europe. Our next panelist or presenter is Nastya Stanko from Hromadske. Welcome. And those who don't understand Ukrainian, please take your headphones because Nastya will speak Ukrainian, as far as I understand.
I'm sorry for choosing Ukrainian, but if you will have
You are in Lviv. How can a person be sorry for speaking Ukrainian in Lviv?
I mean that you should take your earphones here for listen me and for translation, but I will try to answer your question in English if you will have some question in English.
So it's a great honor and responsibility for me to speak on behalf of Ukrainian journalists, because there are not that many Ukrainian journalists as panelists in this Lviv Media Forum. So I will actually speak on behalf of all of you. I suppose you have any claims, I will try to be responsible for that. And I'm also here on behalf of the frontline journalists, because for a year and a half, I've been working as a correspondent covering the events in the front line or in the occupied territories and cities, or the ones that are in at the front line or very close to the front line. I mainly communicate with people at the front line, and where I mainly cover what Ukrainian servicemen are doing by 80%. And always when I speak in the trenches to soldiers, I keep asking them the question of what their dreams are, who is waiting for them at home, just to show kind of personality behind the person keeping weapons, a gun or a machine gun, or a person who is shooting from the Grad system, or being a pilot of the drone. And I think that I also need to tell a couple of words about myself for me to better understand what I do. So I have been covering the events of the war since 2014, and of course a lot of us Ukrainian journalists find it difficult to hear in the world media that the war has been going on for a year and a half. It started on the 24th of February 2022, because it really has been going on for 10 years, and we cannot separate these two stages of the war. If we separate them, this means that we don't understand the context. And a lot of servicemen who are now at the front line were also there in 2014, and in the period of 2014-15, I disliked being called war correspondent, because I actually had never imagined that I would have to work as a war correspondent in Syria or Iraq. But just war came to my home, to my country, and I just didn't have any other choice but to go to this war. And when the war broke out, I was 27, I didn't have children. And when the full-scale invasion of the second phase of the war was launched, I already had a child who was 1 year old. And these were two absolutely different wars. If you have children, if you don't have children, your perception of the war is different. My family went to Ivano-Frankivsk from Kiev because we used to live in Kiev, and I took my family to Ivano-Frankivsk and then came back to Kiev. But generally, I decided to make kind of a vacation, to have a kind of a vacation. I stopped being the chief editor of Hromadske when my child was 6 months old. But when I saw that the war broke out, I came back to my own media and said that I'm going to be the war correspondent. I know how to do this. I remember how to do this. I will go to the front line. So I took my family to the Ivano-Frankivsk and came back to Kyiv to cover the events of the war. And then my current itinerary is saying goodbye in the evening to my child, who is now 2 years old. Then I take a train, I go to Kyiv, and then from Kyiv, together with my team, we go to the front line or to the east. And getting back to the topic of our panel, I quite often tend to think about the impact of my work. Is it really worth leaving my son for a week or 2 weeks? And is it worth, if I understand that probably I will not come back from the business trip, is it really worth doing this? Will our reports have any impact? If you are running the risks, maybe it's better to become a medical nurse in the army and help the injured soldiers, or maybe it's better to be a volunteer to help with the evacuation of people or other things like that. What helps me a lot to survive, to stand in this, well, that's a couple of things where I really feel that they're precious. Our reports from the front line have millions of views, almost all of them, and we are watched not only by the Ukrainian audience, but a lot of foreign audiences, and these audiences keep writing to us, keep helping us, keep donating money. And I see all these three things where this impact is visible. And these three things urge us to keep moving, to take the train, to leave your child and go to the front line again and again. The first thing is that though we all, Ukrainians, find it difficult to live now, whether you live here or abroad, because we know that the war is going on and nothing ends up, and new tragedies occur, and sometimes it's really difficult to bear this, to stand all this. But I always see some ordinary bravery. That is the notion Ukrainians have come to be liked for by the world. Quite often you see a heroic deed and you realize that you're happy to live among people like that and see what they do. See by your own eyes and have a chance to convey this message, to show this picture to others. I wonder if we could watch a part of our video from the town of Liman, Donetsk region. It was 2 weeks and a half before the occupation of this town.
Все, забираем, делаем.
Let's take him very carefully.
Open the door. Let's try and have him seated. I have all these bags. I need to put them somewhere. Okay, I'm in. Let's get rolling.
Це коли його поранили?
5 днів назад.
Скільки?
5 днів назад.
When was he injured? 5 days ago. And my phone went dead. I recently charged it. We have to be out of here within seconds. Alive? Thanks God. Yeah, he is alive. I didn't believe it. So it hit your yard. 8 projectiles at a time. We didn't really expect it. We spent the entire night in the basement, and then we went out at about 10 o'clock in the morning. That was the most massive shelling. We could not really have a good sleep in the basement. So he stayed at home, and I went to my neighbor's place, and then they started shelling. He ran out of the house, but he didn't really know what to do. Hang in there. Just hang in there. Everything will be fine. It's a guy, Artur. He was injured, 21. This village is very close to the front line. It's a village in the vicinity of Liman. It was not really shelled, and so this guy was wounded 5 days before we came. The mom had a charged phone, so she called all the relevant services, but no one dared to go and pick him up. He had an injury to his head, back, limbs, 6 fragments. It was quite severe. We agreed with the police officers that we would go there and pick him up, but the city of Liman was heavily shelled, and we told the police, look here, come on, people are waiting there, they're waiting for evacuation, and then the police agreed to go there with us, so they went there, they picked them up, and then police officer Max decided to go there and pick up Artur. He was not really obliged to do that. I think he decided to do that out of his own heroism and enthusiasm, so they rescued him. Then we went to a hospital in Slavyansk, and the doctor said that if it hadn't happened at that specific time, in a few hours, he would have died. On the 1st of October, the city of Liman was liberated. On the 5th of October, we went back to the same police officers, and we went to that house. Artur was not there. Now he's in Germany undergoing treatment, and everything will be just fine with him. When Max came, picked up Artur, and then transported him to the hospital in Slavyansk, we had this dialogue. Police officer Max had tears in his eyes. Our eyes were tearing up as well. We realized, we had this awareness that we had saved a person, a human life, and it was just a confluence of circumstances. And then Kolan, my partner, shook Max's hand and said, "Glory be to the heroes." And when I'm recounting the story, I have goosebumps all over me, because people do amazing feats because of the war. In light of this war, we can see a lot of Ukrainians and heroes. They are ready to sacrifice their own lives for the sake of other people's lives. When we were back in Le Mans in October, we saw a completely different picture of occupation. The city was basically decimated and leveled off. And I would like to show another brief clip from the liberated city of Le Mans. Look here, unknown, number 12. Unknown men. And look there, there was a hit there, no plaques, so we have no clue who is buried there. It's enough, thank you. This man's name is Vova. For 1 month, Vova was kept in a prison that was created in a police station, and he was taken by the Russians because his adoptive aunt told her daughter on the phone that we will not go anywhere, we will wait for hours. And one of the neighbors recounted this conversation to the Russians. He was captured, he was tortured, and then he had to pick up corpses from the streets, and he would bury these people in this improvised cemetery in Izum and some other cities as well. We were the first ones to see the cemetery because we were among the first ones to make it to Le Mans. And then the dead bodies were exhumed from that cemetery. Now it's part of the criminal case and criminal proceedings against the Russians. Unfortunately, there were 3 local police officers among those people that exerted torture and humiliated. So all our friends fled from there, so they left the city before the occupation, but 3 local police officers decided to cooperate with the Russians. They didn't really fare that well. I think they were jailed in Yenakiyevo, in so-called Donetsk People's Republic. I'm not really sure what exactly for. There's another important nuance in what we do. We document the crimes committed by the Russians, and then all this becomes part and parcel of the criminal proceedings. This way we demonstrate that these are not the stories made up by the Ukrainians, that they did happen. Another thought circulating in my mind, 8 heroes of my reports have already died. And there were even situations when we were putting together video reports about them, but they were already gone. They were not with us anymore. If needed, I will shoot. I will defend my land. So, one of the heroes of this video report passed away. Another one, please. All these heroic deeds are taking place not because we really want to do them, but this is the only way out. I mean, something went awry at the planning stage. Ilya's and Sviatoslav's units participated in the counteroffensive. Sviatoslav died on the 29th of August during the attack of the Russians' positions. He was 32 when he died. These 2 video reports had to follow each other. The focus was on the future counteroffensive in the south. The shooting took place in August, and while we were putting together the video clips, 2 heroes died. Padre was a priest. When the full-scale invasion broke out, he decided to become a combat medic, and he died trying to save his combat fellows. Sviatoslav is from the Crimea. He was a recon commander during the offensive. He also died, and this is something that we found out about while editing the video report. So basically, we had to mention in the captions that one of the heroes, one of the characters had died. I think the only thing we can do is keep the memory about them alive. This is part and parcel of our work. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I will be more than happy to answer them. Nastya, thank you very much for your presentation. It's just incredible what you're doing, and I cannot even fathom what you felt when you had just talked to this person and then you find out that this person is not alive anymore. So you are there putting together the video report, and then you know that most likely these are the last images where they have smiles on their faces, where they are devising some plans. So thank you very much for documenting these hideous genocidal crimes on the part of the Russians. Thank you.
And now I welcome Janine di Giovanni from the Reckoning Project, who had already held yesterday a very moving presentation. And Janine, the floor is yours. Yes, please, to the...
I think we had a short film we were showing first.
When they took my dad away, I tried not to think about it. Nobody explained anything to us. One man said that he would be returned in 7 years. At first they said, we can take you to a foster family for a bit, the three of you, until your dad picks you up, or we can take you to an orphanage. I said that I won't tell them until they let me speak with my dad. The image I saw when I looked into the gym, the largest room, was genuine hell. The way hell is depicted in ancient icons. The faint light from the candles, people sitting next to each other. They didn't hit you in the head, they hit you on the legs, several blows, but the kind of blows like in prison, with their hands, and they hit really hard. It feels like you have a concussion. When you fall, they pick you up, they strip you. For 2 or 3 hours, you're standing there naked. It's cold, you're freezing. There were so many killed people, many injuries, heavy injuries, traumatic amputations. The ones killed had their bodies seriously damaged too. A sea of blood, moaning, screams, help. I think I lost my hearing for a bit, or I don't know. I couldn't understand. Then I got up, looked at my leg. It was all covered with blood. Here's what's happening with my leg now. And this man grabs me and he pulls and says, don't look, don't look. I ran there toward the body and lifted it up. I saw that, yes, it was him. And his stomach was torn up. You know, like his skin was just pulled off. And I could see his insides. He asked me how I was feeling. Naturally, I realized he was a doctor. I replied that I was fine. He said, well, if you're fine, then tomorrow we'll remove the stitches. I didn't even ask where the stitches were. He said they didn't have any painkillers. Will you handle the pain? I said I would. The aerial bomb landed right outside this window. I don't know where I was, but somewhere, wherever, it helped me survive. These were scared people. They tortured them so much, just brutally. They were beaten to such a degree. When a man stands, well, the man, but he's beaten black and blue, just a solid hematoma. They said they were passing the current through the ears. Artillery fire. Maternity hospital. It was a woman whom we were trying to help. Unfortunately, the child was already dead. We weren't able to save the mother or the child. I couldn't bring myself to put the baby in the bag with the woman. My colleague did it for me. It was hard.
I'd like to say that the Reckoning Project was formed out of great anger. I have been doing this for a very, very long time, more than 30 years, in 19 wars and 3 genocides. And this, unfortunately, is my 3rd Putin war. I was in Grozny when it fell to Russian forces in 2000. I was in Syria for many, many years. Putin did the same thing in Aleppo that he did in Mariupol, and now Ukraine. So on the day of the invasion, Peter Pomerantsev phoned me and said, what can we do that goes even deeper than journalism and has even more impact? I know, having been called many times to The Hague, that often what happens with frontline journalists who are recording extraordinary evidence is that they're not taking it in a way that it will be admissible to court. So my idea was, let's take frontline Ukrainian journalists. We only wanted to use Ukrainian because it's your country and it's your justice that you will get back. And we train our team in international humanitarian law, in a very strict methodology, which is based overall on do no harm, meaning that you cannot re-traumatize victims. This is really important because many journalists over and over again don't mean to, but by asking witnesses to retell their stories, they actually put them back into a state of deep trauma. We then get our testimonies, we verify them using OSINT and other tools, and they go into an archive. And I talked to many of you about this yesterday. From that moment on, we then go 2 paths. One is to the prosecutors. We work with the Ukrainian courts, but we also work with the international courts, The Hague, the ICC, the Special Tribunal, and various universal jurisdictions. We have a team of lawyers on the Reckoning Project as well as researchers. The second part of it is the part that really comes down to all of you, and that is we take our witness testimonies and we build films, but we also build long format narrative pieces to basically counter Kremlin disinformation. My partner is Peter Pomerantsev, of course, is an expert on Russian propaganda, and Natalia Gumanyuk, who you saw these past 2 days, is an extraordinary journalist. But yesterday, I talked to you about historical memory and how important it is to be journalists today because we have the keys to history, to historical memory. And as Ron also quoted today, that wars are fought twice, once on the battlefield, the next time in history, how it's remembered. But today I want to talk to you about evidence, because even if you are not a war crimes investigator, evidence is the most important thing you will do as war reporters or those documenting this war, because evidence does not lie. In 1945, the great American journalist Edward Murrow came out of Buchenwald camp, absolutely stunned and horrified by what he saw. And this is what he said: I pray you to believe what I have said about Buchenwald. I have reported what I saw and heard, but only part of it. For most of it, I have no words. So many of you know what this means. You've seen things, you've witnessed things that even your cameras or your memory cannot duplicate. It's that horrible. So what comes after the words, the photographs, and the reporting? Hard evidence. Now, it can be documents, it can be intercepted radio reports, it can be emails, it can also be witness statements taken very soon after the atrocities happen. So one of the points we made there is the Reckoning Project works in a very unique way. In many of the wars I witnessed, the tribunals didn't start for years after the wars ended, and more importantly, they didn't begin the investigations. So they waited till the war was over, witnesses die, witnesses get old, they fade into villages. I want to go back and give you 2 incidents of wars I've reported far from here, and how evidence was absolutely crucial in bringing about war crime tribunals. So May 2000, Sierra Leone, tiny West African country undergoing a horrific war. 14-year war by the time I got there. There were very few journalists. There was not an international or a local regional corps as there is here. There was 2 or 3 other people who were reporting there. So when I got there, the country began, Freetown, the capital, began to fall because the rebel forces surrounded it. Civilians were running away, terrified. They had already endured these horrific crimes against humanity, mutilation where their arms were amputated by the rebels to make them grotesque symbols of fear. I was in a crowd when suddenly government forces started shooting on the crowd. And I ran with a local guy who was just next to me. He took my hand and we started running through alleys to get away from the shooting. And on our way, we saw someone assassinate someone we hid behind a bush and saw a man being assassinated. And then he said to me, "Do you want to go to the president's house?" And I said, "Okay." The president had fled in terror when the shooting and the uprising started. So we did something very stupid, which is we went into the house, not even thinking that it could be booby-trapped. But we went in, and there the president had run away, leaving all of these documents, which we immediately started putting anywhere we could, in our backpacks. I left the president's house and realized that the documents were absolutely crucial evidence that the war in Sierra Leone was all about blood diamonds. Some of you may know that, some of you may have seen the film with Leonardo DiCaprio. But these documents had all of the diamonds that were sold to high-level UN people, members of government, and it traced the roots of where these diamonds went, from Freetown to Antwerp to London to New York. Everything was there, written down in like a child's handwriting. So that night I didn't sleep very well, and the next morning what was left of the government called a press conference and said, "There is one of you out there that has taken some important documents, and I want them back." And I was such an idiot, and completely reckless, and I went up to this man and I said, he was the Minister of Justice, by the way, and I said, "I have your documents, but I'm not giving them to you until you bring me to Ahmed Teja, the president." And he just looked at me in a kind of horror and said, and I quote, "Little girl, you are in Africa. You have no idea what you are doing." So then I got scared, and I went to the last remaining diplomat, who is the British consul, and I unpacked my documents and I gave them to him, and he just looked at me and said, "You're a bloody fool. They will kill you for this." Those documents, I shorten the story, eventually made it to the Sierra Leone War Crimes Tribunal, and they were important in indicting the people listed there who had actually traded these blood diamonds, which resulted in the death of 50,000 people. And I did get out of there alive. The second short story is Chechnya, 2000. Chechnya was Putin's first war. He had come to power in August. By December, he was waging an extraordinarily painful war on Chechnya, leveling Grozny, turning it into a parking lot. Before I got there, a colleague of mine, Miguel, who was later killed in Sierra Leone while we were working in that period 6 months later, said to me, be sure to get out, be sure to let the Chechens know you want to leave a good 3 weeks before you start to lose your mind from the shelling, because it will take them that long to get you over the mountains. Grozny fell while I was there, but because there were no other journalists, there was myself, a photographer called Thomas Dvorak, who had just started his career, and a French researcher. So there was no Associated Press, there was no Reuters, there was no UN, there was no Médecins Doctors Without Borders, no one to sort of back up my gut feeling that Grozny had fallen to Russian forces. We had to call it, Thomas and I, by judging that the entire Chechen army had retreated over a minefield, and we were all holed up in a village outside of Grozny. But what we witnessed in that aftermath of the fall was horrific Russian torture, abuse of civilians, and evidence, hard evidence of what had happened. Thomas's photographs went on to become epic, real depictions of what happens during wartime and in the aftermath. So I won't keep you anymore. I spoke for a long time yesterday about what we do at the Reckoning Project. But our goal is to stamp out impunity. And I started this talk by saying we started the Reckoning Project out of anger. And my anger was at seeing the bad guys walk away all the time. They just would fade into villages, disappear, take on new identities. Radovan Karadzic pretended to be a New Age healer for years and lived in a village and treated people. Meanwhile, their victims were left behind. They couldn't fade away, nor could they erase the horrific things that happened to them. So that's basically why we started it. This morning, by chance, I was watching CNN, and there was something that came on saying that 23 years after the Rwandan genocide, 1994, sorry, no, not 23 years, decades after the Rwandan genocide, the architects of it are still at large. They're still running around freely. But the 1 million people they killed will never be on this earth again, nor will their families ever recover from it. So when people say, why do you and your team do what you do? It's hard work, it's sad work, because I know we're gonna get these guys. I absolutely know it. Thank you so much, and keep doing the great work you do.
Thank you, Janine. It was really very moving, and I believe I would not be very wrong, or don't overestimate my capacities to understand the undertones, but the formulas between the pictures, like attacking maternity houses and wards, or like indiscriminately attacking of civilians, this is actually the listing from the United Nations Convention on Prevention of the Genocide. What is actually the proof that what the Russians are doing since February last year is legally a genocide. And I remember very well, when we raised the topics of the legal qualification of genocide early last year. Then we were silenced. Oh, you're too emotional. It's not genocide. It's only war crime. Don't use the word genocide. It's too strong. And what you're doing is amazing, because you prove that what the Russians are doing is really.
Okay, so Lviv, the city of Lviv, is basically where genocide, the term genocide, was founded by two Ukrainian Jewish lawyers, Raphael Lemkin and Loptpower, who both went on to serve as prosecutors at the Nuremberg trials. So they both were at the University of Lviv. So Lviv is an extremely important place when we talk about war crimes and genocide.
Indeed, thank you. There is a great book on this, East-West Street, amazing book, highly recommended. But I'm sure we will be able to discuss these topics in the Q&A section. And now, to not prevent Gulliver Cragg from France 24 from his presentation, welcome, Gulliver. And please raise to the stage.
Hello, have I got the thing for the video open? Yeah, I'm Gulliver Cragg. I've been covering Ukraine for France 24 since 2010, actually, and living in Ukraine since 2014. I'm really here as a representative of the mainstream media, I guess. I don't have any special project or mission to present. I'm just responding and trying to report on the news as best I can on a day-by-day basis. And I've just got a couple of reflections, I guess, in response to this theme, media play big, and a little bit of criticism of France 24 and myself, which I would like to very much make clear as a disclaimer. I intend as criticism of the media in general, and I don't really think that we're worse than anybody else, but I should say that to start with. My first thought when looking at the theme, I wonder if you can guess who those guys are before I play the clip. My first thought about this theme, media play big, and media influencing the tide of the war is, well, certainly it's absolutely clear that a lot of people in Ukraine and in the Ukrainian government and in the Ukrainian military think that that is the case and expect that the things we do will influence the tide of the war. And in general, they have their views, hopes, opinions about how exactly we should do that. And those are pretty varied, but they don't always amount to them saying, just let the journalists have complete, free, unadulterated access, the truth will out, and the truth will be the best, nothing but the truth, and let the truth triumph, if you like. I think that most foreign journalists covering Ukraine have at some point found themselves in disagreement with some representative of the Ukrainian authorities, whether it's about access or whether it's about the way that they seem to be expected to present the story. And that's natural, of course, and it's a reflection of the fact that we don't want to be doing propaganda. But I think we also have to remember all the time that we're in a very, very exceptional situation at the moment, a desperate situation in a way. Rebecca Harms, I think, said yesterday, Ukraine has to win this war. I mean, all other things, all other priorities surely fall away behind that one. And I don't think that the overwhelming majority of members of the Ukrainian military or politicians or other officials who I may at some point have been in disagreement with have any other goal than that. We don't have a disagreement about the goal and about what Ukraine is trying to achieve, only about the means. So every time I think that the military should be giving me more access, or that I am annoyed with them for clearly trying to present me something that's not exactly a reflection of the true reality, I have to ask myself, well, does this mean that I think I know better than them? And sometimes I really think I do about what's the right thing to do, but I think that we should always question whether, do I really know better than them in this case? Now, France 24, as some of you here may have picked up on, got in a little bit of trouble lately. We got a letter from the Ukrainian Agency of Digital Television and Radio or something, because we had played, although it wasn't actually us who made this report, a report that was made in the occupied part of Donbass, embedded with Russian soldiers there. It was made by France 2. France 24 has an agreement with France 2 to play their reports, and often junior editors put them out there without thinking about it very much. And that was definitely the case this time, and I hope it's not going to happen again, because it did prompt a discussion, an editorial meeting at France 24, where the boss, Vanessa Borgraf, was very clear in saying, think about it, because this report was really terrible. It presented these Russian soldiers in occupied Donbass without giving the context of the fact that they're soldiers of an invading army. It presented them in a sympathetic light. It didn't contradict what they said, and as soon as I saw it, I wrote to the office saying, what the hell were you doing? And everybody, most people anyway in the office, very quickly agreed. They took it down. Nevertheless, we had problems with access for a little while after that. There was some kind of threat to take away our accreditation, which never materialized, thankfully. And, you know, I hope that Ukrainian authorities don't go too far in reacting heavy-handedly to things like this that they don't like. But the thing that worries me a bit about it is I kind of think that underlying the Ukrainian authorities' reaction is actually a feeling that nobody should ever go make reports on the other side at all, you know? And that I disagree with, and that's why I wanted to show you, this is the first clip, even though it's actually from 2016, so a lot earlier in the war. And it's not me who made it, it's my colleague Elena Voloshin. She was in Donetsk. I just translated it, that's why it's my voiceover on the English version. She was with some so-called soldiers of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic, and she asked them whether it's true that they're getting weapons from Russia.
No one is helping us.
Every time we resist a Ukrainian attack, we pick up enough of their weapons to supply a whole unit.
It's all trophies and spoils.
Trophies.
We've got a lot of trophies.
Yet these men can't explain how exactly they pick up the Ukrainians' weapons, since this is mainly an artillery war. Direct contact between the sides is rare. But since Russia denies providing any military support to the separatists, they stick to the official line. And to help push that line, the DPR has its very own news agency, Doni, whose reporters are apparently not afraid to resort to a bit of fakery from time to time. We overheard this conversation between a Doni journalist and a DPR commander.
Делаем как?
Ну, такой же, типа, украинская сторона нарушает перемирие.
Да, я их одену в украинскую форму, там никто не помнит, трофеев много.
И все, мне как бы начальство сказал, они как бы там думают, как это.
So you see the two things in this. I hope, as you saw, you play what the guys say and then immediately point out that it really can't be true because they're claiming to be getting trophy weapons when it's an artillery war. They don't come anywhere close to the Ukrainian soldiers. And then it moves on in the report to another sequence that Eleanor was so happy. I remember when she overheard these guys having this conversation about disguising themselves as Ukrainian soldiers in order to commit atrocities, because we were really at that time trying as hard as we possibly could to prove what Russia was doing there in Donetsk and all the fakery that they were involved in. I remember Eleanor writing to me like so excited that she got this on tape. And so that's a report that I remember us being quite proud of at the time, and something that's definitely the fruit of trying to do something that's going to have an impact, because we felt like, wow, it's really necessary to try to prove to the world what Russia is playing at here, and it's quite hard to find that proof. But then, look at how it's presented on our website. This is back in 2016. The Russian secret behind Ukraine's self-declared Donetsk Republic. What kind of a secret? It certainly wasn't a secret to me. And I think that, you know, looking back, it's terrible that, and again, it's not just France 24, this was generally the way that these things were presented in much of the mainstream media back then, was that there was a separatist uprising and, oh, it may be actually being directed by Russia. The narrative should have been, you know, there should have been absolutely nothing secret at any point about the fact that Russia was behind the so-called Donetsk People's Republic. And I think that standing, you know, here in 2023, all of the mainstream Western media need to ask questions about how the narrative of a separatist uprising in Donbass among Russian speakers managed to gain traction, you know, and managed to, I think it happened progressively, actually, not immediately in 2014, but more as the years went by. The narrative that Russia was trying to push actually gained more traction, despite the efforts of people like myself, I think, to counter it. I certainly felt like at the time I was very much trying to tell everybody what was really going on. But just to be cruel to myself, I decided while I was preparing for this presentation to Google Gulliver Cragg and Russian-backed separatists, and I found this.
A group of pro-Russian forces are armed with Molotov and many more who've been injured, all on the pro-Russian side. The pro-Russian forces are saying that the death...
as you see, I was using the term pro-Russian. That was in Mariupol in 2014. And I knew that these guys were directed by Russia. But I remember at the time, right? Everybody's calling them pro-Russian separatists. And I didn't want to be too pedantic. After all, they weren't Russian citizens. They were Ukrainian citizens. They did want to separate. People were saying it's not a false definition to call them as pro-Russian separatists. And it is, it's not an inaccurate term, even though Ukrainians at the time were very much objecting to this term and wanting us to much more stress the fact that they were being directed by Russia. But as Raphael earlier was saying, from the Financial Times, a lot of media move their correspondents on every few years because they don't want their correspondents to get too into the country that they're in and be too much of a bias towards the country that they're in. And you're aware of that as a correspondent. You don't want to be too much going against the grain of whatever the general editorial policy is of the media that you're working for. You don't want to get sort of labeled as a guy who's too pro-Ukrainian and too pedantic. So for a while, I went with what the other people were saying and called them pro-Russian separatists. In my defense, quite quickly changed and moved on to Russian-backed separatists, which is short and sweet in English, and really Russian proxies would have been better. But hardly anyone was doing that at the time, and I didn't want to see myself as a campaigning journalist or somebody who was, too much trying to push what was seen at the time as like a certain agenda. And I think we all need to, reflect on that. And at the time, I feel like now I should have tried harder. And I think lots of people should have tried harder. Nowadays, I would like to tell you that even if they do so much as spell Odessa with 2 S's in English, I call them up and I say it's 1 S. And I'm very, very, very pedantic. And of course, nobody minds anymore because I think people do feel that, maybe we should have listened more to the Ukrainians back then and not let this Russian narrative creep into things. It's not really, though, obvious how we could have avoided this Russian narrative creeping into the general mainstream perception if we apply the standard principles of journalism, where you go to a place, you report what you see, you talk to the people you meet. Because if you go to Eastern Ukraine, you'll meet people who've got pro-Russian attitudes. The difference is that there are obviously people who are very skeptical of the Kiev government. The key difference is that those people would never have taken up arms, started a war if they hadn't been given the arms by Russia, and if Russia hadn't wanted them to do that. That even now today, though, don't you sometimes feel like try to explain this to people who don't understand Ukraine very well, you feel like you're pointing out some kind of nuance, that there's a nuance in the fact that they wouldn't have taken up arms and started a war, but that's not a nuance. It's the whole difference between this being an internal conflict and this being a Russian aggression, and it should have been framed as a Russian aggression much, much, much more clearly from the beginning. This is something that I bear in mind all the time, especially considering that among France 24's viewership at the moment, there are loads of people who still think that this all started with an uprising in Donbass that Ukrainian army moved in to crush. These are people, we've got a lot of viewers in Africa and the Middle East, and they are currently subjected to Russian propaganda very, very strongly. So in my also in order to not just be self-flagellating, I wanted to show you some things that I feel like we're doing in order to have that audience in mind, me in particular, and that's doing a lot of reporting about the problems faced by Ukraine's farmers and grain exporters, because those countries are very much concerned by this. People in those countries are suffering because of this war, because of the food crisis that it's engendered, and that's also a thing. These aren't pictures of. But
today, all Ukraine's seaports are either occupied or blocked by Russia.
I'll skip to the end of that because it's got the sound on and I wanted to talk over it, but it's I got access very early to film at the seaports in order to show the grain that's there, and it was hard to actually get access. And these aren't pictures of sort of, war crimes, but I hope that they are images that help people to visualize also what the realities of what's going on. And another part of that here, hopefully, is a report without the sound on, is telling the personal stories of Ukrainian farmers. This is one guy that I actually filmed twice, Alexander Kirichishin. He's got land in Mykolaiv Oblast that was at that point not under occupation, never was, but that was only a small part of his farm. Most of his farm was in Kherson region and under Russian occupation. We later went back there and saw, once it had been liberated, how it was in ruins and his $2 million worth of sunflower seeds were rotting. At the time when I made this report, I hope it's coming up, he had a smaller quantity, but nevertheless quite a large quantity of sunflower seeds that were in a barn in Mykolaiv region. I think we'll see them in a minute. And I very much wanted to see them, and he wasn't very keen to show them to me at first, but then he did. There they are. He couldn't sell them at the time because the ports were still blocked. The grain agreement hadn't been reached, and he couldn't get them out, and he was wondering what to do with this huge pile of sunflower seeds. But there's another reason why I wanted to show you this clip, which is that there weren't just sunflower seeds in that barn. I think it's okay to tell you now because the front lines moved a long way from there. There were also Ukrainian military vehicles, which of course I did not show in the report. And that's an example where it's kind of a no-brainer, right? That you don't show the Ukrainian military vehicles if there's a chance that that means that the area will then get fired upon and there's an obvious security imperative. But the point is, we're all the time only showing part of the story, and the other, that there are decisions about what you should maybe not show that are often harder to make when it's things that are very, very much a part of the reality in Ukraine, but that definitely the Ukrainian authorities, if you gave them a choice, would tell you that they'd rather you not show it. At the moment, the story that I'm working on is about mobilization, and the large numbers of people who in reality in Ukraine are trying to avoid being mobilized to the army. And I've got people on tape I wanted to show you, but I think I've run out of time, talking about how much they want to run away. And it contrasts with these inspiring, which are also part of the truth, of course, but these very, very inspiring images, videos, stories of Ukrainians that we see. I'm inclined to think that showing the other side as well and not presenting all Ukrainians as amazingly brave heroes, but also just presenting the reality of the fact that if there is full mobilization in your country because it's under attack, you may be just very, very scared and trying to find ways to get out of it. And that's also human, and it brings home the reality of how bad war is. But I have to say, I'm not completely confident of that, I'm not completely confident that that is a report that I should be making, and I'm at the moment in a sort of tortured phase of editing the report, wondering what to put in and put out. I think I've run out of time.
Thank you, Gulliver. Thank you. First of all, thank you for your astonishing, honest presentation and talking about the mistakes which media made during the early years of the war. I can remember a lot of reports when I said, "Oh gosh, should it be used that wording or that?" And I remember how I tried to push, at least in my company, I tried to do that. I always wrote Russian army, but it contradicted completely the overall idea, because the standard wording was pro-Russian or Russia-backed, etc.
You couldn't call them Russian army, the DNR people in 2014, because it was when the Russian army came in when there was Ilovaisk, and later on in the summer, right? At the beginning, but they were Russian. You had to find a different term, but pro-Russian probably wasn't the right one. Russian-backed, maybe Russian-directed or Russian proxy. It's not obviously easy to find the right term, but definitely people should have made more effort to not just go with the pro-Russian separatist, I think.
Yeah, thank you. I think we can discuss it later, and I'll dig into the concept of effective control, etc. I think Janine can add here a lot of legal approach to the discussion. But now let me introduce you the last panelist today, and after this presentation we will go to the Q&A section, and please prepare your questions and prepare the participation. And now welcome Christopher Occhicone from Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg News, and Stern magazine. Gosh, I wished I would have been able to write in my CV 2 of this media, only one. You have 3 of them.
Okay, so hi, thank you for having me. Is that good? So I want to show you quickly some work on a project I've been photographing here since maybe 2016. And it's a civilian project, and then some things from the war, like actually from this week that I photographed. So, and also when I get to some work from the front line, I'll tell some stories about Guy's interaction and some of my interaction with other members of the media, and it's critical. And I think it's instructive maybe for younger journalists to hear what guys say, what, you'll see. But so this is, what's her name? Maria Lvova Belova. She's the Russian Minister of Children's Rights, and she's got a warrant out from the International Criminal Court for organizing the deportation of children. Does everybody here think that this is reasonable, right? I think so. Vladimir Putin is charged with this crime. Yes? What? Yes? This one? What? Put them together? I think that other guy messed them up. All right. So that's okay? Yeah, that's okay. Okay. So I think everybody agrees also Putin guilty of this crime. Hold on. So we're talking about power of photographs. My mentor took this photograph, I want to say 1989, 1990. It's from a Romanian orphanage. And all of these photographs from this place, from these different places, show that there was widespread institutionalized starvation, deprivation, neglect, what's the word I'm looking for? Internment of children against their will. And I wonder how many people here think that had Ceausescu survived, members of him being the president and members of his organization should have been tried for international crimes against humanity. Anybody? I think so. Now, who here thinks we should investigate the Ukrainian government for crimes against humanity? Does anybody have a reason to think that that might be necessary? Nobody? Okay. So, I'll show you something. This is an internat in central Ukraine. I've photographed here for probably a total of months actually spent there, and children starve to death. They get about 200 calories a day. Does anybody think this is right? A child on a leash in a dirty diaper. Children with epilepsy are tied up. They're in bed. This is it. This is their whole existence. He has epilepsy. He could hurt himself, so we tie him up. And I've seen the same with kids with only cerebral palsy that would be otherwise completely functioning people. This kid, 15 years old, he weighs 15 kilo. Does anybody here think that Ukraine is living up to, what's it called? The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child? Does he look like he's maximizing his potential? What about this? I photographed this and witnessed this. This kid was here for 4 hours. The nannies who work at the internat, they're tasked with either changing a diaper or taking kids to the toilet. But what if, as a time saver, you never know when somebody needs to go, you tie him up and put him in a bucket and leave him there for 4 hours. Everybody knows what bed sores are, very easily avoidable. I mean, maybe a disabled child deserves the touch, warmth of a human touch, but they don't get it. I mean, I have the exact same sponge I clean my pots with. Does anybody think it's okay for children to be left totally unsupervised, where higher functioning kids routinely molest other kids? And doctors will always say, like this boy, he's incurable. But I'll tell you a little quick story about him. Volunteers went in the middle of the night and just took him. And here he is 6 months later. And now, 2 years later, he's in school in Indiana. He goes to school. He was left for dead. So now I wonder if anybody else thinks like your government should be looked at a little closer. And now we'll switch to cheerier topic. This is my friend Peretz. He's a very interesting guy. Like in a group, he's the guy who's loud, funny, kind of Cossack style, as you can see, and very proud of that. And we had a lot of conversations about media that would come. This is in a stabilization point on the Bakhmut front line. And one of the words he used to describe journalists was padanuk, which is a scavenger. And a lot of guys felt that people come looking to photograph for a half hour, don't talk to anybody, and just want this bloody picture and leave. And yeah, and this brings me to, on my journey here, I was thinking of him and I put him here. I was in Dnipro having coffee, was stopped on the way, and I met some young photographers, and they asked me, have you been to the cemetery in Dnipro? And I said, no. And so you think it's worth going to? Do you think there'll be a funeral? And I said, I don't know. But really what I was thinking is, like, what right do we have to photograph people in pain? And it lingers over me all the time. And as I show you some more work, you'll see what I've been working on. And it's a question I think you need to ask yourself all the time. This is Peretz's brother, Gennady, in a village 2 hours south of Uman. He's welcoming friends and family to Peretz's sorry. He's welcoming friends and family to Peretz's funeral. This is his house, and you can see there's a guy who likes things in order, not a rich guy, but likes to keep things bright, shiny. This is his mother. These are all the people that came out, friends, other people from the village. It's the walk to the church. It's his wife, Natalia. It's the honor guard. And that's his wife and brother. And I guess it brings me again, like, just to this question of what right do we have? And when we work, I think we should always try to work with purpose and a reason. So now I'll bring you to the rest of the guys from Peretz's group, who I spent just now 10 days with, just outside of Bakhmut, and it's a very bad situation. And I want to tell you, like, why, at least maybe it's a justification for what I'm doing, but nonetheless, I'm making a book about them. It's a collaborative effort. They're writing the text and kind of have a nice little plan to do that. They came up with the title, and it's a song. It's kind of funny. I'm not sure how good it'll look on the cover of a book, but one of the guys, that's nonstop injured. Every time, you never get more than 3 or 4 hours sleep. So one of the guys has a little techno beat he does, and he just says all day, all night, what the fuck? And that's it. They've been doing this for years. So now imagine this. I made a selection, and I just kept them in chronological order of 36 hours on the front line. And it's the 36 hours. This is Monday, Tuesday, right? So as we look at these, and I tell you a little bit about the guys, just think about what you were doing Monday afternoon. So imagine you wake up, and this is your reality. This is all you see. The first thing you see, somebody comes into the basement, you've slept a couple hours, and it's like, injured people. Here we go. And sleep over. And then as you get to know guys, you find out what an interesting kind of diverse group it is. And that's why I think it's important, like Janine talking about historical memory. I don't know that, like, for example, I showed you these pictures from the internet. if it changed anybody's mind, if people, I'm sure I've heard every excuse of why this is. So for me to photograph this kind of thing, it's to honor these guys and the work they do, honor the injured, and preserve it for historical memory. And actually, I'm working with National Archive of Ukraine to preserve this. Peretz is had a, well, kind of like a GoPro, hours and hours of film of him working, of him joking around with the guys, all going to the National Archive. You know, and so many different guys, like the center here, Dimitro, Pozivny Beagle, because he likes beagles. This guy doing cancer research, he's a doctor, but hasn't practiced medicine in 15 years. He does cancer research. And now, you know, February 24th, he volunteered, and here he is. You know, and not a lot of pictures of guys relaxing, you know, and I can't show you outside, but if you saw outside, it's unbelievable. S-300 rocket landed maybe 30 meters from our spot, and, you know, 30 meters to the left, everybody dead. And so we have one spot to relax. It's kind of in between two concrete walls, and this is our spot. This is SS, Sergei Sergeyevich, not because anything else. And again, talking about like an interesting group of guys. He's the guy who came up with the title. He wrote the song. And he left school at 14, and now he's a paramedic. Probably one of the most efficient, creative medics you're ever going to meet. You know, civilians still living in this area. A lot of them, and I think the gentleman before me touched on it, pro-Russian. This guy, very pro-Russian. You know, we're taking out our guys who were killed, and this is his first day doing this, so he's still wearing the mask, trying not to breathe it. You know, sometimes you do have a little light moments. We eat in the basement. I think, you know, anybody who's covering on the front knows you eat in the basement. This is Johan. Sleep in the basement, where we eat. You know, and then even you have this moment, these guys have a few minutes downstairs, and it's nonstop. And probably one of the things we talk about a lot is you see things and they affect you, but sometimes we talk a lot about like what you hear. And there's I think, if you haven't been in this kind of place, you might expect screaming, but it's more like a moan, a guttural moan most injured guys have. And things you hear sometimes, like guys asking, am I going to see my daughter again? And a lot of times you'll see friends, guys are brother in arms, fighting for a year together, and just one guy lightly injured talking to his comrade, saying like, man, stay, look at me, look at me. It really profound. You know, these guys, it's kind of funny, they're out cold, but if I told you an artillery shell landed 50 meters away, and the ammunition dump was on fire, and it was like the 4th of July. I can't show you the picture because it would show where we were. But these guys, that's how tired they are. I mean, this guy, a doctor who served in Afghanistan, has been in the Ukrainian army since 14. And he told me it's never easy. You know, he's pronouncing somebody dead. This is the moment to call time. And these guys have to do this every day. And you see sometimes with injured guys too, and dead guys, what they were carrying, what was in their pocket. And this soldier who died, that's what was in his pocket. That's what. Fuck. It's if you don't carry it, it's his pocket. It says sugar. You know, and at the same time, life does go on in a strange way. Like you know, as you spend time with people, you learn their nuances. He really likes the ladies, and he's on the phone with a couple of them nonstop. You know, you have little moments like this also. You know, and you also find a lot of volunteers working there. Lada is a volunteer from Hospitaliers, comes for 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off with her husband, Luca. This is a kind of strange thing. I think as you work there, you realize like maybe if you didn't see this all the time, the guys filming it and kind of having conversations. You might think this is crass, but I think it's the only way to kind of cope with what's going on. You know, and you have pictures like this that sometimes it's such a horrific injury, guys will say, like, you need to take a picture of that. Somebody should see that. And this is one that I was working in another room and somebody brought me in to photograph that. You know, and as you saw before, our friend was cooking. We're sitting down to eat, and Tanya, one of the nurses, came down, injured guys. So just imagine, you're working 5-6 hours of just horrible stuff, and you finally sit down to eat, and I don't think so. And you walk upstairs and you see this. And that's what was in his pocket. And I'll show you this guy to lead into the next photograph. And I think, like, I spend weeks at a time here, and I think one of the dangers, like, if you come in, work for an hour, and leave, and you take the exact same photo, you might think that, what the hell is she doing? She's on the phone, she's taking pictures, making a selfie. What is she doing? And it can seem kind of cold and distant. However, if you spend time with guys and you get to know them, you'll know that her husband, she's from occupied village in Luhansk. She's been fighting, her husband's been fighting since the beginning. And, you know, her husband's storming trenches, and they have she got a call. She's not gonna not take it, you know? So it's kind of a strange mix of horror and regular life happening at once. When there's free time, I make portraits. And she will probably be the next commander. You know, and sometimes you're in the middle of this and everybody enjoying this, and then boom, here we go again. It's nonstop. You know, and I sometimes like pictures like this because, like, this is how guys want to be seen. And as you get to know guys, this is really great too. Pasha, a medic from Cherkasy, every picture I have from him, he's doing this. So, you know, as you get to know guys over months and months, you don't do it, I'm gonna do it, don't do it, I'm gonna do it. And we kind of have, crazy to say, even a little bit of fun. And this is the last picture I took before I got in my car and left. And this guy, he also lost his leg below the knee, and the anesthesia was kicking in. But, so he's pretty clear-minded, you know, all head and organs okay. And I was, to be honest, kind of frozen. And he looked at me and he's like, "Are you gonna take my picture?" And so, here you go. And that, and yeah, well, so I told you about him, and you know, I kind of enjoy these pictures too because I think this is how guys want to be remembered. That's it.
Thank you, Christopher. Thank you for your presentation. I think don't leave the stage. Don't leave the stage, or you will be like called to you back like in several seconds. Yeah, you may just bring the chairs. While the chairs have been installed, I just like wanted to ask you, like you had like two parts in your presentation. First was the pictures of the orphans who like were suffering, and the second was the soldiers who are like fighting for Ukraine. And how do you see like the connection between like two of these like series of the pictures?
Well, so I really wanted to, I mean, even though we're here to maybe more talk about the war, I wanted to point out that there was some things that really nobody here is looking at. Like, so I really just want the opportunity to show that. That's one. Two, auditory. I can't describe it, but like what it sounds like when somebody's dying. I heard it a lot on the front line and working in the stabilization points. And the orphans all sound like that too, a guttural moan, a repeating, nobody's screaming, just a repeated moan. And also, you know, I've shown this work to, I can't tell you how, of the orphans to how many outlets, and either, it's a little too hard for our magazine or newspaper, or after invasion, it makes Ukraine look bad. And I tell you, when I've shown this to all of these guys, and one of the things, this is one of the reasons they're fighting, and they will tell me that, I mean, everybody, that like this is unacceptable, and heads should roll. So, yeah, that's why.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a moving explanation indeed. Indeed. Thank you. So I ask now to come to the stage all the participants of the presentations. So we are starting the Q&A section now, and those who are observing this discussion online, please don't hesitate to ask your questions in the online section. We get them in the WhatsApp chat, what we have like here internal. And if you send your questions in online, I promise you I will read them and I will do my best to ask them. But now it's the time of the audience to raise your hands, to raise your voice, to ask a question or to leave your commentary. So please, who will be the first after this long row of the presentations? The gentleman in the middle, please.
I'm Сергій Муругін, представляю балканських глядач. Така, не знаю, не запитання, просто...
Одну хвилинку. Або я можу перекладати, поки ви... Так,
коротка така історія. У 2014 році ми робили фотовиставку в Брюсселі, в
staging a photo exhibition in Brussels, and Rebecca probably remembers that. So we had an exhibition, photo exhibition in Brussels in 2015. We brought tens of photographs which were supposed to be shown in the European Parliament, in the House of the European Parliament. And that was a very interesting case. We were told you will not be able to show these photos in spite of the fact that it was already agreed, because that was broken Ukrainian military equipment, and it was written that this is the strike arranged by the Russian army, but they claimed that we don't have any evidence, any proof that this was really done by Russians. But we said that, come on, this tape, this film is actually the proof. But they said, no, that is not yet a proof. That will make the situation more complicated. It's not. And we were, well, the question is that we are talking about censorship, and who wants to see what can be shown to people, what cannot be shown to people. So as far as I understand, their norm should be as follows. Whatever does not bring any harm to the people who watch this, you can show. Or maybe you have some other opinions on that point.
I will shortly translate the question for those who have not heard the beginning. Sergey, вибачте, я не почув ваше прізвище. Sergey says that in 2014 he was bringing photos from the Donbas region to the Brussels, to the European Parliament, and they wanted to make an exhibition there with the photos. But in the European Parliament, they were told that it is impossible to present these pictures with the commentaries like Ukrainian military equipment destroyed or damaged by the Russian shelling, because there was no proofs from the point of view of the European Parliament that it was Russian shelling. And he believed that the photos are the proofs, and effectively after all they had to rewrite all the commentaries all the night, and he believes that it is some sort of the censorship, while the only limitation for the journalist work should be, do I harm with my pictures or I don't? That was his commentary. And what do you think about this this limitation of the comments?
Can I answer the? I want just to continue this presentation of my colleague about stabilization point near Bakhmut. Yes, it was near Bakhmut. And I don't know if all of you know, but actually like video or photo reporting in stabilization points near the front line is forbidden. Like it was forbidden officially by the armed forces of Ukraine, medical armed forces, and we don't know why, but sometimes I heard from international journalists that this is the censorship, they told me, because if we can't show the reality of war, I mean wounded soldiers or wounded civilians, but it was about soldiers, of course, these stabilization points, because it's stabilization points of army, yeah, it's not for civilians. If like we can show the wounded, if we can show the deaths, except funeral, yeah, because funeral is something else actually. When we see funeral, it's I don't know, aesthetic. People just cry, and we see these flags and everything, but we can't show sometimes deaths in like this soldier was alive and 5 minutes later he is dead already. And they said that why it's forbidden for Ukrainian army, why we can't show. And for me, this is also a big question, and that's why we try to go to stabilization points. You said in your presentation, I think that this your friend who was died, he named journalists who try to go to stabilization points garbage man. Yeah, I'm correct. Yeah.
Micro. If you talk something, like take a micro.
I can.
Yeah, I mean.
Do we have additional micros?
I mean, I think nobody would like to hear this, but when other journalists, like a lot of times, if they came with a press officer, which happens, it happened a few days ago, some talk, some don't, and they seem to respect the need for this information. They're happy to, kind of give some standard answers. But like, I've been there when like 5 cool dude Italian journalists come with lots of fancy equipment and come inside and say, we want to come in. And I mean, they call them other words. Not a lot of time for that. There's a lot of feeling that like, you're coming into our house. We live here also.
But you was allowed to come.
Yeah, I stay there for weeks at a time because, I mean, so keep in mind, I'm photographing the war also since 14, and for a good chunk of it, rather anonymously. I mean, I was nobody, not that I'm somebody now, but I was really nobody. So I have a good reputation amongst soldiers. I was brought there by soldiers from Duke Right Sector and introduced back in August, and kind of built a relationship where, I mean, I'm getting messages now, like, when are you coming back?
Yeah,
I just want to finish.
You're still in my job. You're still in my job by running this discussion. I think that Janine wanted to add something.
I'm just want to finish about like I think that.
But then don't lead the discussion.
Sorry?
Finish and don't lead the discussion with Christopher.
Okay, sorry. I just want to finish. For me, it's very important also when we try to show the reality of war, and sometimes it's difficult, to be also, I don't know, on the human side, because, for example, we had one story when we came to stabilization point in Bakhmut with Anadolu. It's a big Turkish agency. And the press officer asked us just not to show wounded soldiers who were without, who couldn't talk. They were wounded so much, and they showed everything. And after all of us have problem, and I think that sometimes this is a part of humanity, how we show wounded soldiers, wounded people, and sometimes I see that international journalists don't think about this.
Yeah, thank you. Indeed, I think that it is like a question of decision on every single case. Janine, you wanted to comment.
Yeah, so I think this brings up a wider issue, a really important issue that we need to look at, that was touched on both by Chris and by Gulliver. So all of you remember the terrible Amnesty International report that came out last year, which was flawed in many, many ways, largely because how we at the Reckoning Project looked at it was the methodology, which was deeply flawed. But after that came out, I know when I was in Geneva or New York, largely at UN gatherings, people would say, does the Reckoning Project look at Ukrainian war crimes as well? And I had a very easy answer. I could say, no, it's not our mandate. That's not what we're funded to do. So I could get away with it. More people do say to me now, don't you feel as a human rights organization that you have an obligation to look into this? And I say, if we came across it, we would. We have not, and that's not what we're looking at. We have very thematic and geographic, demographic points and topics that we cover. But both what you raised and equally Gulliver said at one point he was filming, but he didn't show a Ukrainian military, I think a tank or something inside where the grain was. When we verify our statements, our witness statements, it's really important that we can back it up by saying there was no Ukrainian military installation anywhere near there was an attack. Otherwise, our credibility is ruined. And this is something we really need to think about as well, as painful as it is. And I know Raphael, I think, said earlier that news organizations move international journalists around every few years because they don't want to keep them too long in one place. I know certainly I've been guilty of this my entire career. You know, in Bosnia, I was completely on the side of the Bosnian Muslims. In Palestine, I am on the side of the Gazans and the West Bank Palestinians. But it's something I do think about a lot and think of, you know, how do you report? In this case, we're human rights monitors, we're not really journalists. How do you report it fairly and accurately when you're in the middle of a very brutal, aggressive invasion?
Well, I think that Gulliver wants to add something, but before, I think I think that the decisive difference is the systematic character. And when it's the war, since 14 months, with dozens of thousands of soldiers, not over 100,000 of soldiers, fighting from the Ukrainian side. Of course, you can find the cases when international law can be violated by a certain person. The question is if this violation has a systematic character and ordered from the commander, or it is not. And on the Russian side, it is systematic. On the Ukrainian side, I don't know any case of that, but that is, of course, the question of how we are estimating the things. But Gulliver, you wanted to comment.
Well, what I think in this regard is that it's one thing to not say that there are soldiers or equipment in that school or in that barn, because there are obvious security reasons to not say that and not put that in your report. But sometimes you get the feeling that the Ukrainians would quite like to present a message that that school was targeted because it's a school and because the Russians are targeting Ukraine's education system. And that may sometimes be the case, but mostly if they fired on a school, it's because rightly or wrongly, they probably thought there was military equipment there. And I feel like it's not our job to go in for that kind of manipulation, emotional manipulation, and say the schools are being targeted because they're schools, even if, we might be on the side of the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians might be right in thinking that that kind of manipulation will be effective on a certain part of the audience. But even though I'm on the side of the Ukrainians, and even though I think it might be effective, I think that to play along with that kind of manipulation, at that point you stop being a journalist and you become a propagandist, and so, that's where I draw the line, It's like, you don't say that there's military there, but you also don't pretend that there might have been children there,
But you would say that there's, Russia definitely has indiscriminate attacks on hospitals and on schools. I mean, I can hands down say absolutely that's part of Putin's playbook of attacking hospitals.
Yes. Yeah, hospitals and schools. But I mean, I don't know how you make the decision, because there will be a situation where a school was targeted, and in fact, as a journalist, you know that there were military there, and you're not going to say that. Right?
I have a feeling that
That's
it is already much more than the answer to the question of Serhiy, and I think that everyone has some association with the question, but I think that is even more important to let the audience to ask more questions. And I'm pretty sure that the answers will be exactly as intense as now, because of course everyone has something to say about this discussion. Yes, please, in the middle, lady. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, my question is for Christopher, and you said that we need to light up our inner problems in the country today. And from your experience, how do you think we need to light up them? What's the right words, place, maybe a tone of voice, not so as not to play for Russian propaganda and not to maybe overlay typing it, and yeah.
The question was to Christopher, right?
Couldn't hear it.
Once you want to repeat the question?
No, we couldn't hear her.
Oh, they didn't have. Could you repeat the question, please?
Okay.
Louder.
Okay.
Great. Great.
So my question is about, you said that we need to light up our inner problem in the country now, and from your experience, how we need to do it properly and how journalists need to do it properly. What time or maybe tone of voice they need to choose so as not to play for Russian propaganda.
You're talking, I'm sorry, you're talking about like how journalists should work? I don't. You're talking about what?
It's like it's connected with your first series of photo.
From the internet?
Yeah, from this child. Yeah.
Oh, like what? You mean how to fix that situation?
No, I questioning about how to show it. As not to play for Russian propaganda that took it and say,
I don't care. I mean, you're starving children to death in a systemic way. I think it's completely reasonable that Zelensky go to the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity, because it ends with him. At least like Kravchuk had the excuse. Kuchma had an excuse. You inherited from the Soviet Union. It's 30 years. Poroshenko was going to a quite nice internat in Kyiv, and him and his wife there with, it seemed very nice, with kids with Down syndrome, talking about like, if we want to be part of Europe, then we need to take care of our most vulnerable citizens. So he knows, Zelensky knows, Minister of Social Policy, last few of them know, and they know what European standards are. And there's plenty of, what's the word, like playbooks of how to fix this. Like Bulgaria fixed it, Poland fixed it.
When we see crime, we have a choice. Even if we are journalists, we can go to police or to prosecutor's office. There is no need to make a story about every crime you see. Don't you agree? You may just, if you see the kids suffering, I'm pretty sure they will not be helped if you publish a story in New York Times, but they will be maybe helped if you go the same moment to the prosecutor's office. Have you done it?
So, for example, I know somebody who was doing similar work, a local journalist in Ivano-Frankivsk, looking into the theft of pensions from these kids. He opened the gate, this is a couple years ago, opened the gate to his dacha, there was a grenade on it. I don't want to say which oblast, but I was going to, just before COVID, have an exhibition in a very nice place. When they saw all the pictures that I was going to show, curator brought us in, was like, can't do it. End up speaking to, I don't know the correct exact word, but like kind of like the oblast, like Ombudsman for children's rights. Basically like, you're gonna get your legs broken, can't do it. So going to the, I mean, it's very, what you're saying right now, go to the prosecutor's office, I think is extremely naive. And I wonder, like...
I'm German.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
There's a,
So there you go. So yeah, I mean, I think it's insane. I mean, I don't know that anybody here.
Very quick
thank
point.
you.
There's a
I think
I'm not agree. It's not insane. You
I
did.
have an announcement. We have about 5 minutes left, and all the questions are hard and harsh, and are extremely important. But I see one hand raised there, and I think this question and maybe one question more. After that, just an announcement. After that, we have 15 minutes. Those who want to go to Kyiv need to go to the buses which are waiting for us in front of the building. And those who don't want to go, they may continue discussion. But those who want to go, definitely, they need to go there to the bus. So one question. Here, 1, 2. I think we do it just in one move, and then the answer, please.
Natalia Gumenyuk, The Reckoning Project. The question is about the visuals of the war and this question of the censorship, which is discussed as a censorship. But is there any discussion in international media, about the change of the course of the war with the technology, in particular because of this online war, that the visual materials is heavily used by the intelligence, both Ukrainian and Russian, for, adjust the fire, adjust the shelling. And therefore, while reporting the war online during the modern time, it's really like you becoming the part of the warfare. It was always, but now, the most of the intelligence coming from the Telegram channels, from the photos, and that we really need to rethink how we deal with that. Because so far, we have this ethical discussion, but it's really become the part of the war.
Thank you, Natalka. And here, 2 questions here, please. The gentleman, and then the lady, and then we have answers.
Сергій Щук, видавництво «Є». У мене запитання до іноземних журналістів,
Publishing House. I have a question to the international journalists and international representatives. If you were Ukrainian journalists, what would you recommend us during the war? Or what would your advice be for us during the war?
My name is Yulia. I'm working for UAM Ukraine, organization that organized the conference United for Justice just 2 months ago here in Lviv. And I have a question to mainly to Janine, but maybe to all other members of this panel. You are working a lot to justify Russian war crimes in Ukraine, and you really assist to the law enforcement agencies in restoring justice in this way. In your opinion, what is missing in your possible interaction with law enforcement agencies? Is it not enough trust between media and prosecutor's office, police, and what could be added to strengthen this interaction?
Thank you so much. So the question about the war reporting online, can media help the Russians by shellings? Then the advice to Ukraine media, and about the trust. Who is ready to answer? Gulliver.
I've got an answer for the question, what advice to Ukrainian journalists? But I don't have advice really to Ukrainian journalists. I've got advice to Ukrainian officials, which is tell the truth. If there's information that you can't give, say no comment. But bear in mind that Ukrainian officials have a massive credibility surplus compared to Russians, right? Western media think automatically that the Russians can't be trusted and the Ukrainians broadly can, and they should really, really value that trust. And even if there's something unfortunate for Ukraine, I'm thinking about particularly that time when what seems to have been a Ukrainian rocket landed in Poland. Better to tell the truth about it and keep that credibility than sacrifice your credibility by not telling the truth. And so the only advice to Ukrainian journalists is to try to hold Ukrainian officials to this principle.
Who is ready to answer Natalka's question about responsibility for the airstrikes, etc.? You, Janine? Yeah, the question was that as the Russians obviously take the information about location of troops, objects, electricity, etc. from the photos and videos people post online on news agencies, on Facebook, etc. How can media not be used by the Russians as the little helpers? That was a question from Natalka Gumenyuk. Yes, you may answer. That is, I asked you to put it into protocol that Natalka has managed to ask a question that nobody is able to answer. And
well, I think everybody has integrated the idea that we should not show a video or photo that could potentially be used to help the Russians with targeting. And I think as the media, we were a bit slow to understand this earlier on and got frustrated with being forbidden to film such and such a thing. But I think people have got it now, that this is not an instruction that we're receiving for no good reason or just because Ukrainian military are paranoid. I think people have understood that. It's another question, the fact that these images find their way online anyway because amateur people are putting them on Telegram. But, you know,
Thank you.
And I would also say, like, we've seen, like, I've been in positions, very like, stabilization points, and seen pictures taken by locals in Russian Telegram, because guys are looking at Russian Telegram channels. So I think a lot of that is, targeting is from people that are supporting
Sometimes
Russia.
you might think it's a bit ridiculous. I remember in Kryvyi Rih, I wasn't allowed to do a wide shot of Kryvyi the steel factory from far away. And I'm thinking, but everybody knows where that steel factory is and what it looks like. You can see any picture online. But then, you know, you think, yeah, but maybe there's some air defense battery located near it that I can't see, but that a trained Russian eye would be able to see. You can't be sure, you know?
So thank you. If someone can shortly answer the question about the trust, because now the buses are already waiting at the entrance, and I urge everyone to continue the discussion amid the dinner, because the buses will bring us to the dinner party, and we can relaxedly continue the discussion there. But if you, Janine, can ask very short the question about the trust. We have no time to repeat the question precisely. Sorry, you can go to audience and ask and answer the question during the dinner. So I'm very sorry for being that rude, but I have orders in my chart from the organizers, and I follow the orders as a good German. As a good German, thank you, German Shepherd Hound, you know. So we have now the buses waiting for us in front of the building, and we have a possibility to have relaxed discussion there. If you want to participate in the unbroken guided tour, you may register at the registration desk or in the WhatsApp chat, but also in the registration desk. And tomorrow we have the start of the discussion at 10 o'clock. And please correct me if I'm wrong, the buses will take us from the hotels at 9:15. Is it correct? It is correct. So thank you so much. Thank you all the guests. Thank you all the panelists. And I urge you to continue the discussion amid the dinner. Thank you.